Sometimes, the most desperate moments reveal who we truly are underneath. In the lawless frontier town of Perdition Crossing, nothing is ever what it seems on the surface. When Sister Mercy Hale stepped off the dusty stagecoach, she came to heal the sick and teach forgotten children. The outlaws saw her as easy prey for their land grab scheme. The townsfolk watched in horror as a giant, battle-scarred cowboy named Boone Calder dragged her away by her hair in broad daylight. But Boone Calder wasn't the monster they thought he was. This former gunslinger turned recluse was actually saving her life, pulling her from the jaws of a trap before the real villains could strike. Hidden away in his remote cabin, he revealed his shocking plan to use both their reputations to draw the outlaws into their own trap. What happened next would test everything they believed about justice, redemption, and trust. But could a pious nun and a feared gunman really work together to bring peace to a land where violence was the only law? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sister Mercy Hale clutched her worn rosary beads as the stagecoach wheels ground to a halt outside what the driver generously called the Perdition Crossing Depot. Through the dust-caked window, she saw a collection of weathered buildings that seemed to lean on each other for support, much like the broken souls she'd come to serve. The wooden cross hanging from her neck caught the afternoon sun, casting a small shadow over her heart, a heart that had seen enough suffering in field hospitals back east to last several lifetimes. The driver, a grizzled man with kind eyes, helped her down from the coach with unusual gentleness. "You sure about this, sister? This ain't Boston. Hell, pardon me, this ain't even civilization most days." Sister Mercy smoothed her simple grey habit and adjusted the white coif that framed her weathered but determined face. At 43, she had learned that God's work often led to the most unlikely places. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Patterson. The Lord has called me here, and I've learned not to question his geography." The depot consisted of little more than a covered platform beside what optimistically called itself Main Street. A few curious faces peered from doorways and windows, women in faded calico, men in dusty work clothes, children with eyes too old for their years. Everyone seemed to be measuring her, wondering how long this latest do-gooder would last before the harsh realities of frontier life sent her scurrying back to safety. Sheriff Wilkins approached with what passed for authority in his step, though his badge looked like it had been polished more often than his conscience. He was a man of average height, with a soft belly that spoke of too many easy deals and not enough hard choices. "Sister Mercy, I presume. I'm Sheriff Wilkins. Got your letter about coming to tend our sick and teach the young ones." She shook his offered hand, noticing how his grip lingered and how his eyes didn't quite meet hers. "Sheriff, I appreciate you allowing me to establish a small mission here. I understand there's great need." "Oh, there's need all right." His laugh held no humor. "Question is whether folks around here are ready for the kind of help you're offering. This is rough country, sister. People here have learned to look out for themselves first." As if summoned by his words, a woman emerged from the saloon across the street. Martha Kensington moved with the practiced confidence of someone who'd survived by reading people and situations quickly. Her auburn hair was pinned up in a practical style, and her green dress, while not fancy, was clean and well-maintained. She owned the Silver Dollar Saloon, the closest thing Perdition Crossing had to a social center. "Don't mind the sheriff, sister," Martha called out, crossing the dusty street with purpose. "He's just worried you might interfere with the natural order of things around here." There was steel in her voice when she said, "natural order." And Sister Mercy filed that tone away for future consideration. "Mrs. Kensington, I presume. I'm grateful for any welcome, though I hope my presence will complement rather than interfere with the community's existing rhythms." Martha studied her with intelligent brown eyes that had seen their share of disappointment. "You really plan to set up in that old building behind the general store?" It's been empty since the last preacher decided our souls weren't worth saving. Every soul is worth saving, Mrs. Kensington. Sometimes it just takes the right approach. A small crowd had begun to gather, and Sister Mercy noticed the way conversations stopped when certain names were mentioned, how eyes darted toward the hills beyond town when the wind carried sounds from that direction. There was fear here, carefully hidden but persistent as heartache. 3 children emerged from behind Jameson's general store, their clothes patched and repatched, their faces smudged with the universal dirt of childhood adventure. The oldest, a girl of perhaps 10, stepped forward with the gravity of someone who'd learned responsibility too young. "Are you really a sister?" the girl asked. "Like a nun sister, not a family sister?" "I am indeed. What's your name, child?" "Emma. This is my brother Tommy and my friend Sarah. We heard you might be starting a school." Sister Mercy knelt to Emma's eye level, noting the intelligence that sparkled there despite the hardship written in the girl's thin frame. "I am, if there are children who want to learn. Can you read, Emma?" "A little. Martha taught me some, but she says she doesn't know enough herself to teach us proper." Martha flushed slightly. "I do what I can, but book learning wasn't exactly part of my education." "Then perhaps we can learn together," Sister Mercy said, standing and addressing both Martha and the children. "Some of the best teachers are those who admit they're still students themselves." The sheriff cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Sister, there's something you should know about the challenges you might face here. We've had some trouble lately with—" "Trouble?" Martha's interruption was sharp. "That's a gentle way of putting it, Sheriff." Sister Mercy sensed undercurrents she didn't yet understand. "What kind of trouble?" Before anyone could answer, the sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention. A group of 6 men rode slowly down Main Street, and Sister Mercy felt the temperature drop despite the afternoon heat. Conversations died. Children moved closer to adults. Even the sheriff seemed to shrink. The lead rider was a man in his 40s with cold blue eyes and a mustache that failed to soften his hard features. He sat his horse like someone accustomed to looking down on others, literally and figuratively. His clothes were fine enough to suggest money, but the way he wore his gun suggested something far more dangerous than wealth. "Afternoon, Sheriff," the man said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who expected to be obeyed. "Mrs. Kensington, and who might this be?" His gaze settled on Sister Mercy with undisguised interest. "This is Sister Mercy," the sheriff said quickly. "She's here to—" "I can introduce myself. Thank you, Sheriff." Sister Mercy stepped forward, her spine straight despite the obvious menace radiating from the riders. "I'm Sister Mercy Hale. I've come to establish a small mission to serve the medical and educational needs of your community." The man's smile was as warm as winter frost. "How charitable. I'm Rex Kensington. I have certain business interests in this area." "Any relation to Mrs. Kensington?" Martha's jaw tightened. "Unfortunately, yes. Rex is my dear brother-in-law." The family resemblance was there in the bone structure, but where Martha's features spoke of strength earned through adversity, Rex's suggested cruelty refined through practice. The tension between them was thick enough to cut. "Sister, you might want to reconsider your generous impulse," Rex continued. "This isn't the kind of place where charitable work tends to prosper. People here have learned to be suspicious of outsiders bearing gifts." "I'm not bearing gifts, Mr. Kensington. I'm offering services to those who want them." "There's a significant difference." Rex's cold smile widened. "Indeed there is. Well, I hope your stay proves educational." He nodded to his men, and they rode on, but the implied threat lingered like smoke after a fire. Sister Mercy noticed how no one spoke until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely. "That," Martha said finally, "is the trouble the sheriff was too polite to mention." As the afternoon wore on, Sister Mercy began to understand the complex dynamics that governed life in Perdition Crossing. Rex Kensington and his men controlled the surrounding territory through a combination of legal maneuvering and barely concealed violence. They'd been systematically acquiring land from farmers who found themselves unable to make their mortgage payments or who faced mysterious problems with their livestock and crops. The old mission building behind the general store was indeed available, though its previous occupant, Reverend Thomas, had left rather suddenly after preaching one too many sermons about justice and moral courage. Sister Mercy examined the space by lamplight, one large room that could serve as both chapel and classroom, with a small living area in the back. It would do nicely. That evening, as she unpacked her few belongings by candlelight, Sister Mercy reflected on her first day in Perdition Crossing. The need here was even greater than she'd imagined, but it went far beyond medical care and education. This was a community living under a shadow of fear, and she sensed that her presence might force a confrontation that had been building for some time. Her rosary beads caught the candlelight as she prepared for evening prayers. Each bead represented a prayer, a small act of faith in the face of uncertainty. Tomorrow she would begin in earnest, but tonight she would ask for wisdom to see beyond the surface of things and courage to act on what she discovered. Far beyond the town's edge, where the hills rose dark against the star-filled sky, she glimpsed the flicker of a campfire. Someone else was out there, watching and waiting. In a place like Perdition Crossing, that could mean many things, and Sister Mercy found herself praying that when the time came for sides to be chosen, she would have the strength to stand for what was right, regardless of the cost. 3 days into her mission work, Sister Mercy had established a routine that brought small measures of hope to Perdition Crossing. Each morning she tended to the sick in the makeshift clinic she'd set up in the mission's main room. Old Mrs. Patterson's rheumatism was responding well to the willow bark tea, and young Billy Jameson's infected cut was finally healing properly. Afternoons were reserved for the children, Emma, Tommy, Sarah, and 5 others who'd worked up the courage to attend her informal school. It was during her evening walk to check on the widow Morrison, who lived alone at the edge of town, that Sister Mercy stumbled upon something that changed everything. The widow's small cabin sat near a grove of cottonwoods where the creek curved toward the hills, a peaceful spot that had always reminded her of prayer gardens back in the convent. She was approaching the cabin when she heard voices low, urgent, and definitely not belonging to the frail, elderly woman she'd come to visit. Instinct, born from years of wartime nursing, told her to stay hidden. She crept closer, using the trees as cover, and peered through the widow's window. 6 men sat around the widow's kitchen table, and Rex Kensington was speaking in the tone of someone issuing orders rather than making suggestions. The widow herself was nowhere to be seen, and Sister Mercy's heart clenched with worry for the gentle old woman who'd shared stories of her late husband's kindness. "The church deed transfer has to look legitimate," Rex was saying, spreading papers across the table. "Once we establish that the mission is harboring fugitives, Sheriff Wilkins can confiscate the property under territorial law. From there, it's a simple matter of proving the church organization can't maintain proper oversight of their holdings." A man with a scraggly beard leaned forward. "What about the nun? She's got people talking about standing up to us." "Sister Mercy is actually perfect for our purposes. Her presence legitimizes the church's claim to the property, but once we frame them for harboring criminals, she becomes evidence of their poor judgment. The territorial governor will have no choice but to revoke their charter." Sister Mercy's blood ran cold. The forged deed one of the men was examining bore official-looking seals and signatures. These weren't just local thugs. They had connections that reached into the territorial government itself. "Where did you put the widow?" another man asked. Rex's smile was cruel. "Mrs. Morrison has gone to visit her sister in Denver, permanently. She won't be returning to complicate our use of her property." The implications hit Sister Mercy like a physical blow. These men weren't just stealing land, they were murdering anyone who stood in their way. Her mind raced as she tried to process the scope of their scheme. How many other departures and accidents had actually been cold-blooded murder? "The beauty of the plan," Rex continued, is that once we control the church property, we control the water rights to Miller's Creek. Every farm and ranch downstream will have to negotiate with us for water access. Those who won't sell will find their wells mysteriously running dry. Sister Mercy backed away from the window carefully, her heart pounding so loud she was certain they'd hear it. She needed to warn Sheriff Wilkins, needed to. Then she remembered the sheriff's nervous manner, his reluctance to discuss the trouble Rex represented. How far did this corruption reach? She made it halfway back to town before she heard the hoofbeats behind her. 6 riders, moving fast. In the gathering dusk, she couldn't make out faces, but she didn't need to. There was nowhere to hide on the open ground between the widow's cabin and town, nowhere to run that horses couldn't follow. Sister Mercy clutched her rosary beads and quickened her pace, praying they hadn't seen her clearly in the shadows by the cabin. But as the hoofbeats grew louder, she knew her prayers weren't going to be answered the way she hoped. "Sister Mercy," Rex Kensington's voice carried clearly in the still evening air. "What brings you out this way so late?" She turned to face them, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I was visiting Mrs. Morrison. She wasn't home." Rex guided his horse closer, studying her face in the dim light. "Funny thing about that, I could have sworn I saw movement by her windows when we were leaving, almost like someone was watching. Perhaps it was Mrs. Morrison, returning from her errands." "Mrs. Morrison left town this morning, sister. For good." His tone made it clear this wasn't a subject for further discussion. "The question is, what did you see while you were visiting an empty cabin?" The other 5 men had spread out in a semicircle around her, blocking any escape route back to town. Their hands rested casually near their weapons, and Sister Mercy realized she was about to die for the crime of witnessing their conspiracy. "I saw nothing but an empty cabin, Mr. Kensington. I'm sorry to have disturbed whatever business brought you there." Rex studied her for a long moment. "You know, sister, I believe you're telling me the truth about what you think you saw. But the truth has a way of growing in people's minds, especially when they have time to reflect and reconsider." Sister Mercy felt the noose tightening around not just her own neck, but around the entire mission she'd barely begun. These men couldn't afford to let her live, not with what she'd overheard. Then, from the darkness beyond the circle of riders, came a sound that made everyone freeze, the distinctive click of a rifle being cocked. "Evening, Rex." The voice that emerged from the shadows was deep, calm, and absolutely without fear. "Sister." A figure materialized from behind a cluster of rocks, a man so tall he seemed to block out stars, moving with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable with violence. Even in the poor light, Sister Mercy could see the breadth of his shoulders, the confidence in his stride, and most importantly, the rifle held with practiced ease. "Boone Calder." Rex's voice carried a mixture of surprise and wariness. "What brings you down from your hidey hole?" "Just enjoying the evening air. Seems like you boys are having quite a conversation with the sister here." Boone stepped into the circle, and Sister Mercy got her first clear look at the man the townspeople whispered about in hushed tones. He stood well over 6 feet, with dark hair showing silver at the temples and blue eyes that seemed to see everything at once. His clothes were simple but well maintained, and he wore them with the easy confidence of someone who'd never felt the need to prove anything to anyone. What struck her most was the contradiction he presented. His face bore the weathered lines of someone who'd lived hard and seen too much, but there was something almost gentle in the way he looked at her. The rifle in his hands was held with deadly competence, yet he'd positioned himself between her and Rex's men without any apparent effort. "This doesn't concern you, Boone," Rex said, though there was less authority in his voice than there had been moments before. "Maybe not, but 6 armed men surrounding a woman of God in the dark, that's the kind of thing that tends to bother me." Rex's horse shifted nervously, sensing its rider's tension. "The sister and I were just having a friendly conversation about her new mission work." "I'm sure you were." Boone's tone suggested he wasn't sure of anything of the kind. "Sister, were you heading back to town?" Sister Mercy found her voice. "Yes, I was." "Then I'll walk with you." "Evening, Rex." It wasn't a request or a negotiation, Boone simply turned and began walking toward town, his rifle still ready but no longer pointed at anyone specific. Sister Mercy fell into step beside him, acutely aware that 6 guns were probably aimed at her back. For a moment, the tableau held. Then Rex's voice cut through the darkness, cold as winter wind. "This isn't over, Boone. You can't watch her every minute of every day." "No," Boone replied without turning around, "but I don't have to." They walked in silence until the lights of town became visible. Only then did Sister Mercy realize she'd been holding her breath for most of the journey. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I believe you may have saved my life." Boone glanced down at her, and for a moment his weathered features softened almost imperceptibly. "Maybe, but saving your life tonight might have just made tomorrow a lot more complicated." As they reached the edge of town, Sister Mercy clutched her rosary beads tighter. She'd come to Perdition Crossing to serve God and help people, but she was beginning to understand that sometimes service required more courage than she'd imagined. And sometimes it required allies from the most unexpected places. Sister Mercy barely slept that night. Every sound outside the mission, wind rattling the windows, a dog barking in the distance, the settling of old wood, made her heart race with the memory of 6 riders surrounding her in the darkness. She rose before dawn and knelt before the simple wooden cross she'd hung above her bed, but the prayers felt hollow against the weight of what she'd learned. Rex Kensington's men had killed Mrs. Morrison. They were stealing land through corruption and murder, and now they saw her as a threat to be eliminated. When the sun finally painted the eastern sky pink and gold, Sister Mercy rose stiffly and prepared for what might be her last day in Perdition Crossing. She had to warn someone, but who? Sheriff Wilkins had shown himself unreliable at best. Martha Kensington might be trustworthy, but she was also Rex's sister-in-law, which complicated matters. The townspeople were decent folks, but they were also frightened and defenseless against armed men with government connections. She was measuring out ingredients for Mrs. Patterson's willow bark tea when she heard boots on the mission's front porch. Heavy boots, moving with purpose. Her hands trembled as she set down the measuring spoon. The door opened without a knock, and Boone Calder filled the frame. In the morning light, he looked even more imposing than he had the night before. His dark hair was neatly combed, his clothes clean but well worn, and his blue eyes held an alertness that suggested he'd slept no better than she had. "Morning, sister." "Mr. Calder," she struggled to keep her voice steady. "Thank you again for last night. I'm not sure what would have happened if—" "I know exactly what would have happened." He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "That's why we need to talk." Sister Mercy noticed he moved with the fluid economy of motion she'd seen in soldiers during the war, men who'd learned that wasted energy could mean death. But there was something else in his manner, a careful gentleness, as if he was conscious of his size and the effect it might have on others. "Please, sit down," she offered, gesturing to one of the rough wooden chairs she'd arranged for her informal school. Boone remained standing. "What you overheard last night about the church property, the water rights. Mrs. Morrison, how much of it did you understand?" "Enough to know they're stealing land through murder and corruption. Enough to know they plan to use me and the mission as pawns in their scheme." She met his gaze directly. "And enough to know I can't stay here without putting others in danger." "Running won't solve anything, sister. Rex has been planning this for months, maybe longer. Your leaving would actually make things easier for him." She studied his weathered face, trying to read the man behind the legend. "Then what do you suggest, Mr. Calder?" For the first time since entering, Boone's expression softened slightly. "I suggest you start by calling me Boone, and I suggest you let me show you something." He walked to the window and gazed out at the hills beyond town. "See that ridgeline? Third peak from the left, where the pine trees thin out? That's where I live. Been there 5 years now, watching this valley, watching Rex Kensington build his little empire one dead body at a time. Why haven't you done something about it?" Boone turned back to her, and she saw something raw and painful flicker across his features. Because I swore I was done with killing. Because I came here to find peace, not to start another war." He paused, studying his hands. "Because I wasn't sure I could trust myself to know where justice ended and vengeance began." Sister Mercy felt a chill of recognition. She'd seen that look before, in the eyes of soldiers who'd seen too much combat, done too many terrible things in service of causes they'd stopped believing in. "What changed your mind?" "You did." The simple honesty of his answer caught her off guard. She'd expected something about duty or justice or protecting the innocent. Instead, he was telling her that her presence had somehow shifted his entire worldview. "I don't understand." "Way." Boone walked to the far wall, where Sister Mercy had hung a small painting of St. Francis, tending to the wounded. He studied it for a long moment before speaking. "I spent 20 years as a gunfighter, sister. Started when I was 16, and I was good at it. Better than good. Men would cross the street to avoid me, and I told myself that was respect. What it really was fear." He turned back to face her, and she could see the weight of memory in his eyes. "The last job I took was supposed to be simple. A cattle baron down in Texas hired me to run off some homesteaders who were stealing his range. Turned out the homesteaders had legal claims to the land, but the cattle baron had judges in his pocket." Boone's voice grew quiet. "There was a family man, woman, 2 little girls. The man tried to stand up to me, tried to protect his home." Sister Mercy felt her heart clench, knowing how this story ended. "I killed him, right there in front of his wife and children. And for what? So some rich man could graze a few more cattle on land that didn't even belong to him." Boone's hands clenched into fists. "That night, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw exactly what I'd become. A hired killer who'd stopped caring whether the cause was just. So you came here to find redemption." "I came here to disappear, to find some place where my reputation couldn't follow me, where I could just exist without hurting anyone else." He gestured toward the window. "Found myself a cabin up in the hills, built it with my own hands, figured I'd live out my days hunting game and reading books and trying to forget." Sister Mercy understood now why the townspeople whispered about the mysterious hermit in the hills, why even Rex Kensington treated him with wary respect. But isolation isn't the same as redemption. "No, it's not. Took me 5 years to figure that out." Boone moved to her makeshift altar, where morning sunlight illuminated the simple wooden cross. "Then you showed up. I don't see how my arrival changes anything. You saw those children yesterday, Emma, Tommy, Sarah. You saw the hope in their eyes when you told them you'd teach them to read properly. You saw Mrs. Patterson's relief when you eased her pain with that willow bark tea." Boone's voice grew stronger, more certain. "You came here to help people, knowing it was dangerous, knowing you might fail. That's courage I haven't seen in a long time." Sister Mercy felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm not courageous, Boone. Last night I was terrified. This morning, I'm still terrified." "Being scared doesn't make you a coward, sister. Running away when people need you, that would make you a coward." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "I have a proposition for you. I'm listening. Rex thinks he has all the advantages. Money, government connections, armed men, and a plan that's been years in the making. But he's also arrogant. And arrogant men make mistakes." Boone moved to the mission's front door and tested the lock, a flimsy thing that wouldn't stop a determined child, much less armed men. "His biggest mistake is underestimating both of us. He sees you as a helpless woman playing at charity work. He sees me as a washed-up gunfighter who's lost his nerve." A cold smile played at the corners of Boone's mouth. "What if we let him keep thinking that while we turn his own plan against him?" Sister Mercy felt a stirring of something she hadn't expected. "Hope. What did you have in mind?" "Rex wants to frame the mission for harboring fugitives. What if we gave him exactly what he's looking for, but not in the way he expects?" Before she could ask what he meant, Boone walked to the back corner of the mission and knelt beside a loose floorboard. With practiced efficiency, he pried it up to reveal a hidden cache beneath rifles, ammunition, dynamite, and enough supplies to outfit a small army. Sister Mercy stared at the weapons in shock. How long have those been there? Since the day after Rex made his first move against the Morrison farm 6 months ago. I've been preparing for war, sister. I just didn't know what I was fighting for until yesterday. Boone replaced the floorboard carefully. The question is, are you willing to fight alongside someone like me? Sister Mercy thought of Mrs. Morrison's gentle smile, of Emma's bright eyes filled with hunger for learning, of all the people in Perdition Crossing who lived in fear of Rex Kensington's casual cruelty. What exactly are you proposing? That we give Rex what he wants, evidence that dangerous fugitives are using the mission as a hideout. But instead of innocent people being framed for crimes they didn't commit, we make sure the only fugitive he finds is one who's been looking for a chance at redemption. Understanding dawned slowly. You want to use yourself as bait. I want to use both of us as bait, sister. Rex's plan depends on controlling the narrative, making sure the territorial authorities see exactly what he wants them to see. But what if we control the narrative instead? Sister Mercy realized she was gripping her rosary beads so tightly they were cutting into her palm. Everything about this plan went against her nature, against her vows, against everything she'd been taught about turning the other cheek and trusting in divine providence. But she also thought about Mrs. Morrison, murdered for the crime of owning land Rex Kensington wanted, about Emma and the other children who deserved better than to grow up in fear, about all the people who would suffer if Rex's scheme succeeded. Tell me more, she said quietly. Boone spread a hand-drawn map across Sister Mercy's makeshift desk, his calloused finger tracing the contours of Perdition Crossing and the surrounding territory. The map was meticulously detailed, showing not just geographic features, but also property lines, water sources, and what appeared to be guard positions and patrol routes. Rex's operation is more sophisticated than most people realize, Boone explained, his voice low and matter-of-fact. He's got men watching all the approaches to town, informants among the merchants, and at least 3 judges in his pocket across 2 territories. Sister Mercy studied the wanted poster he'd placed beside the map, a yellowed piece of paper bearing a younger version of his face, and the name Black Boone Calder. The reward amount made her breath catch. $1,500, she whispered. That was 10 years ago. Inflation and compound interest have probably doubled it by now. Boone's tone was oddly matter-of-fact. Point is, Rex would love nothing more than to claim that reward while simultaneously solving his Sister Mercy problem. She looked up from the poster, studying his weathered features. You're suggesting we let him think he's captured you? I'm suggesting we let him capture me, with you as the apparent bait that drew me out of hiding. Boone rolled up the map with practiced efficiency. Rex's plan requires the mission to be harboring fugitives. Well, Black Boone Calder is about as fugitive as they come. Sister Mercy found herself pacing the small confines of the mission, her habit rustling softly with each step. The plan was audacious, dangerous, and probably insane. It was also, she had to admit, the first thing anyone had proposed that might actually stop Rex Kensington's systematic destruction of everything decent in this valley. Walk me through it step by step, she said finally. Boone settled into one of the children's chairs, looking oddly dignified despite the furniture's diminutive scale. First, we need to establish that you and I have formed an alliance. Not romantic that would complicate things and probably get you killed even faster, but a partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. That won't be difficult to establish, since it appears to be true. Something flickered across Boone's features, surprise, perhaps, or gratitude. Second, we need Rex to believe that you've convinced me to come out of retirement for one last job. Something that plays to his ego and his greed. What sort of job? The Cattleman's Bank in Silver Creek is rumored to be holding the territorial tax receipts, nearly $50,000 in gold and currency. Rex has been eyeing it for months, but it's too well defended for his usual methods. Sister Mercy stopped pacing. You want him to think we're planning to rob a bank. I want him to think I'm planning to rob a bank, with you providing inside information and moral cover. A nun asking questions about security procedures for missionary fund transfers wouldn't arouse suspicion. Number 3, the implications began to sink in. But if he believes that, he'll set a trap. Exactly. Boone stood and moved to the window, his gaze scanning the street outside. Rex loves being the smartest man in the room. He'll want to let us get close enough to commit to the robbery before he springs his trap. That gives us time to prepare our real strategy. Sister Mercy felt a chill despite the morning warmth. And what is our real strategy? We turn his trap into our trap. While he's focused on the bank robbery that's never going to happen, we gather evidence of his real crimes, the forged deeds, the murders, the government corruption. Then we make sure that evidence reaches people who can't be bought. Sister Mercy sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the complexity of what he was proposing. Boone, I'm a nun, not a detective or a spy. I wouldn't know how to gather that kind of evidence. You wouldn't have to. I've been watching Rex's operation for 5 years, sister. I know where he keeps his records, who he trusts with sensitive information, and most importantly, I know his weaknesses. What weaknesses? Boone's smile was grim. Pride and greed. Rex can't resist gloating over his victories, and he documents everything because he sees himself as building a criminal empire that will last generations. He keeps detailed records of every payoff, every forged document, every accident that clears the way for his land acquisitions. Sister Mercy thought of the conversation she'd overheard at Mrs. Morrison's cabin. Where does he keep these records? His ranch house, in a safe behind a painting of his father. I know because I helped him install it 3 years ago, back when I was still pretending to be just another hired gun. Boone's expression darkened. That was before I understood what kind of man he really was. You worked for him? Once. He wanted me to intimidate a family of homesteaders, the Pattersons, actually. Mrs. Patterson's son and daughter-in-law were trying to establish a small farm upstream from his main holdings. Boone's voice grew quiet. I took his money, rode out to their place, took one look at that young couple working their hearts out to build something decent, and rode back to tell Rex they'd moved on. Sister Mercy felt a warmth spread through her chest. You let them stay. I did more than that. I warned them about Rex's methods and helped them file proper claims with the territorial office. They lasted 2 more years before an accidental fire burned them out. His hands clenched into fists. That's when I decided isolation was safer than trying to pick and choose which jobs to take. The morning light, streaming through the mission's windows, seemed to illuminate more than just the physical space. Sister Mercy was beginning to understand the depth of Boone's guilt and the courage it had taken for him to approach her with this plan. If we do this, she said carefully, and if we succeed, what happens afterward? You're still a wanted man with a price on your head. If we succeed, sister, I'll finally have done something worth the risk of hanging for. Boone met her gaze directly. Besides, the man on that wanted poster died 5 years ago when he decided he was done killing. What happens to Black Boone Calder after this doesn't matter much to me. Sister Mercy stood and walked to her small altar, her fingers automatically finding her rosary beads. She'd come to Perdition Crossing to serve God through service to others. Was this elaborate deception and manipulation truly service, or was it simply revenge, dressed up in righteous clothes? I need to pray about this, she said finally. Of course, but sister, Boone's voice carried a note of urgency. Rex won't wait long to make his move. He knows you overheard too much last night, and he can't afford to let you spread that information. We have maybe 2 days before he decides the risk of letting you live outweighs the benefits of his original plan. The weight of that reality settled over her like a lead blanket. 2 days to decide whether to become criminals ourselves in order to stop a greater criminal. 2 days to decide whether the law and justice are the same thing, Boone corrected gently. Sometimes they are. In Rex Kensington's case, they're not even distant cousins. After Boone left, Sister Mercy spent the morning in prayer and contemplation. but her afternoon was interrupted by a visit that clarified her thinking considerably. Emma arrived at the mission alone, her usual bright demeanor replaced by worry that seemed far too heavy for a 10-year-old's shoulders. "Sister Mercy, can I ask you something private?" "Of course, child. What's troubling you?" Emma glanced around the mission as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Is it true what some folks are saying, that Rex Kensington is planning to shut down your school?" Sister Mercy felt her heart sink. "What have you heard, Emma?" "My pa was talking to Mr. Jameson last night. They said Rex told Sheriff Wilkins that having a school here was putting dangerous ideas in children's heads, that kids who learned to read might start reading the wrong kinds of books." The simple cruelty of it took Sister Mercy's breath away. Rex wasn't just stealing land and murdering obstacles, he was threatened by the possibility that educated children might grow up to question his authority. "Emma, what do you want to do when you grow up?" The girl's face lit up despite her worry. "I want to be a teacher, like you. I want to help other children learn to read and write and figure numbers. Pa says that's foolishness, that girls like me should focus on finding husbands and raising babies. But—" She stopped, looking embarrassed. "But what, dear? But I think maybe if I could read really well, I could teach my own babies to read too. And maybe they could teach their babies. And maybe someday nobody in places like Perdition Crossing would have to be afraid of men like Rex Kensington, because they'd be too smart to be fooled by lies." Sister Mercy knelt to Emma's eye level, seeing in the girl's bright eyes the future that Rex Kensington was determined to destroy. "Emma, that's not foolishness, that's wisdom. So you won't let him shut down the school?" Looking into that young face filled with hope and determination, Sister Mercy found her answer to Boone's proposition. Some battles were worth fighting, regardless of the weapons required. "No, Emma, I won't let him shut down the school." That evening, as purple shadows lengthened across the valley, Sister Mercy walked to the edge of town and lit a small signal fire, 3 quick blazes, then darkness, then 3 more. It was the signal Boone had suggested if she decided to proceed with their dangerous alliance. Within an hour, she saw an answering light flash from the distant hills. The die was cast. Sister Mercy clutched her rosary beads and offered a prayer for forgiveness, for wisdom, and for the strength to see justice done, even if it meant walking through the valley of the shadow of death. Tomorrow, she would begin the most dangerous performance of her life, playing the role of a naive nun being slowly corrupted by a legendary outlaw. The irony wasn't lost on her that in order to save the souls of Perdition Crossing, she might have to risk her own. The performance began 3 days later, when Boone Calder walked into Martha's Silver Dollar Saloon, as if he owned the place. The afternoon crowd, mostly ranch hands, a few traveling merchants, and the usual collection of men who had nowhere better to be, fell silent as the legendary gunfighter surveyed the room with pale blue eyes that missed nothing. Sister Mercy watched from across the street, her hands steady as she tended to a scraped knee belonging to young Tommy, but her heart racing as their plans swung into motion. She'd spent the morning making very public inquiries about secure transportation methods for charitable funds, asking enough pointed questions to ensure word would reach Rex Kensington within hours. "Afternoon, Martha," Boone said, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed saloon. "I'll take a whiskey. The good stuff." Martha Kensington studied him with intelligent eyes, noting the way conversations had stopped, the way hands had moved closer to weapons. "This is a surprise, Boone. You haven't been down from those hills in over a year." "Times change. People change." Boone accepted the whiskey and turned to face the room, letting his gaze linger on each face. "Seems like this valley's changing too." One of Rex's men, a weaselly fellow named Carson, shifted nervously at a corner table. "What brings you to town, Calder?" "Let's just say I've been having some interesting conversations lately. Met someone who's opened my eyes to certain opportunities." Boone's smile was cold as winter. "Turns out there's still plenty of work for a man with my particular skills." Across the street, Sister Mercy finished bandaging Tommy's knee and sent him on his way. but she lingered near the mission's front porch, where she could observe the saloon. Their plan depended on precise timing and careful performance, and she found herself praying that Boone's acting abilities matched his reputation with a gun. Inside the saloon, Martha leaned across the bar, lowering her voice. "What kind of opportunities, Boone?" "The profitable kind. Seems like the right person with the right information can make a man reconsider his retirement plans." Boone finished his whiskey and set the glass down with deliberate precision. "Give my regards to your brother-in-law when you see him, Martha. Tell him I'm suddenly very interested in discussing mutual business arrangements." The message was delivered exactly as they'd planned, cryptic enough to intrigue Rex, specific enough to suggest Sister Mercy was involved, and public enough to ensure multiple witnesses would carry the story. Boone left the saloon without another word, but the damage was done. By evening, half the town would be speculating about what the hermit gunfighter and the missionary nun might be planning together. 2 hours later, Sister Mercy was in her clinic, treating Mrs. Patterson's recurring rheumatism when Sheriff Wilkins appeared in her doorway. His nervous energy filled the small space like smoke from a poorly tended fire. "Afternoon, sister. How's our patient today?" Mrs. Patterson looked up from the chair where Sister Mercy was applying a fresh poultice to her swollen joints. "Much better, thanks to Sister Mercy's ministrations. This willow bark treatment is working wonders." That's fine. Sheriff Wilkins fidgeted with his hat, clearly working up to something unpleasant. "Sister, I wonder if I might have a word with you privately?" Sister Mercy finished securing the bandage around Mrs. Patterson's wrist. "Of course, Sheriff. Mrs. Patterson, please rest that joint for the remainder of the day. I'll check on you tomorrow morning." After the elderly woman left, Sheriff Wilkins closed the mission door and turned to face Sister Mercy with an expression that mixed embarrassment with determination. "Sister, I feel obligated to warn you about something. There's been talk around town that concerns me as a man sworn to uphold the law." "What kind of talk, Sheriff?" "Talk about you and Boone Calder having some kind of understanding, some kind of arrangement." Wilkins mopped his brow with a wrinkled handkerchief. "Now, I'm not saying there's anything improper going on, you understand, but Calder is a dangerous man with a violent past." Sister Mercy arranged her medical supplies with careful precision, buying time to compose her response. The performance required her to seem naive but not stupid, concerned but not suspicious. "Mr. Calder has been nothing but respectful in our limited interactions, Sheriff. He helped me when I was in difficulty the other evening, and I'm grateful for his assistance." "What kind of difficulty?" "I became lost on my way back from visiting Mrs. Morrison and found myself surrounded by riders who seemed unfriendly. Mr. Calder appeared and escorted me safely back to town." Sheriff Wilkins' expression sharpened. "Mrs. Morrison? Sister, Mrs. Morrison left town several days ago. Her house has been empty since Tuesday." Sister Mercy allowed confusion to show on her face. "That's very strange. I was certain I saw lights in her windows that evening." "You must have been mistaken. Desert light can play tricks on a person, especially someone not accustomed to the territory." Wilkins paused, studying her reaction. "These riders who seemed unfriendly, did you recognize any of them?" "I'm afraid not. It was quite dark, and I was rather frightened. Mr. Calder seemed to know them, though. They spoke as if they were acquainted." "I see." The sheriff's tone suggested he found this information very interesting indeed. "Sister, I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but I feel compelled to remind you that harboring fugitives is a serious crime under territorial law." Sister Mercy looked genuinely shocked. "Fugitives? Sheriff, surely you don't mean to suggest that Mr. Calder—" "I'm not suggesting anything, sister. I'm simply reminding you of your legal obligations as a citizen and a representative of the church." Wilkins replaced his hat and moved toward the door. "I'd hate to see someone with your good intentions become entangled in situations beyond her understanding." After he left, Sister Mercy allowed herself a small smile. The sheriff's visit meant their performance was working. Rex was taking the bait, but carefully, using official channels to gather information while maintaining his facade of legitimacy. That evening brought another visitor, Martha Kensington, arriving just as Sister Mercy was lighting her evening candles. The saloon owner's usual confidence seemed strained, and she glanced over her shoulder twice before entering the mission. "Sister, we need to talk." "Of course. Please, sit down. Can I offer you some tea?" Martha waved off the offer and remained standing, her nervous energy filling the small space. "What's this I hear about you and Boone Calder having private conversations?" Sister Mercy set down her medical kit and studied Martha's face in the candlelight. "I wouldn't call them private, exactly. Mr. Calder has been kind enough to share some insights about the local situation." "What kind of insights?" "He seems to believe that the recent difficulties in this area, the mysterious departures, the unusual number of accidents befalling property owners might not be as random as they appear." Martha's face went very still. "What did he tell you, exactly?" Sister Mercy moved to her small altar and knelt to light the candles there, using the ritual to buy time while she chose her words carefully. "He suggested that someone with inside knowledge of banking procedures and community trust might be very valuable to certain enterprises." "Enterprises?" "Financial enterprises that operate outside normal legal channels." Sister Mercy rose and turned to face Martha directly. "I confess I'm not entirely certain what he meant, but he seemed to think my position here gives me access to information that could be quite profitable." Martha's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "Sister, please tell me you're not considering—" "I'm considering many things, Mrs. Kensington. I came here to help people, but I'm beginning to understand that sometimes helping people requires resources that charitable donations can't provide." The lie came more easily than Sister Mercy had expected, and she found herself wondering if the deception was corrupting her more than she'd anticipated. But Martha's reaction convinced her the performance was effective. "Sister, you need to be very careful. There are people in this valley who would use someone like you without a second thought, and when they're finished, they'll discard you just as quickly." "Are you referring to anyone in particular?" Martha hesitated, clearly torn between loyalty to family and concern for Sister Mercy's safety. "My brother-in-law Rex has certain ambitions. He's not the kind of man who tolerates obstacles or complications." "I see. And what would you advise, Mrs. Kensington?" "I'd advise you to be very sure you know what you're getting involved in before you commit to anything irrevocable." After Martha left, Sister Mercy extinguished all but one candle and sat in the gathering darkness, her medical kit open on the table before her. Inside, beneath the bandages and bottles of medicine, lay the small leather journal where she'd been recording everything she'd observed about Rex Kensington's operation. The entries were written in a simple code she'd learned during her wartime nursing service, a method of disguising patient records when treating soldiers from both sides of the conflict. To a casual observer, the journal would appear to contain nothing more than medical notes and treatment records. But anyone who knew the code would find detailed observations about property transfers, unexplained departures, and the pattern of fear that governed life in Perdition Crossing. It wasn't enough evidence to convict Rex Kensington in a court of law, but it was a beginning. Sister Mercy closed the journal and returned it to its hiding place. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as their dangerous game continued, but tonight she allowed herself a moment of hope. For the first time since arriving in Perdition Crossing, she felt like she was fighting back rather than simply enduring. Her rosary beads caught the candlelight as she prepared for evening prayers, and Sister Mercy found herself grateful for their familiar weight. Whatever moral compromises lay ahead, she would need all the spiritual anchoring she could find. The letter arrived on a cold Thursday morning, delivered by a boy Sister Mercy didn't recognize, a thin, nervous child who thrust the envelope into her hands and ran before she could ask his name. The paper was expensive, the handwriting elegant, and the message devastatingly simple. "Sister Mercy, I find myself in need of a woman with your particular qualifications for a matter of mutual benefit. If you are interested in ensuring the continued success of your mission work, you will meet me at the Kensington Ranch tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock. Come alone. Your servant, Rex, Kensington. Sister Mercy read the letter twice before folding it carefully and placing it in her medical kit beside her coded journal. The summons was exactly what she and Boone had expected, but seeing Rex's arrogant assumption of control, written in such polite language, made her hands tremble with suppressed anger. She was still contemplating the letter when Boone appeared in her doorway, moving with the silent grace that had made him legendary. He'd taken to visiting the mission daily, always with some plausible excuse, bringing game meat for her patients, offering to repair storm damage, consulting about theological matters that provided cover for their planning sessions. "You look like someone who's received troubling news," he observed, settling into his usual chair. Sister Mercy handed him the letter without comment. She watched his weathered features darken as he read, noting how his jaw tightened and his eyes grew cold. "Arrogant bastard," he muttered, then caught himself. "Pardon my language, sister. Under the circumstances, I think stronger language might be justified." Sister Mercy moved to the window and gazed out at the street, where normal life continued despite the undercurrents of fear and corruption. "He's moving faster than we anticipated. Rex has never been patient when he smells profit. The fact that he's calling you to his ranch means he's ready to make his offer." Boone stood and joined her at the window. "The question is whether you're ready to hear it." Sister Mercy thought of the conversation she'd had that morning with Emma, who'd arrived at the mission in tears because her father had forbidden her to attend the informal school anymore. Rex's influence was spreading like poison through the community, turning neighbor against neighbor through fear and economic pressure. "I'm ready, but I want to understand exactly what we're walking into." Boone pulled a folded paper from his jacket, a detailed map of the Kensington ranch that he'd drawn from memory. "Rex's house sits on a rise about 3 miles northeast of town. He's got maybe 8 men working for him full-time, plus whoever he can hire for special jobs." Sister Mercy studied the map, noting the careful attention to detail. "You've been there recently." "I've been watching the place for months. Rex likes to think his ranch is a fortress, but every fortress has weaknesses." Boone's finger traced the approach routes he'd marked. "The main house has a clear view of the valley, but there are blind spots on the north side where the terrain drops away toward the creek." "Boone, there's something I need to tell you." Sister Mercy moved to her medical kit and withdrew a different letter, one that had arrived 2 days earlier, but which she'd hesitated to share. This came from the Territorial Marshal's office. Boone's expression grew very still as he read the official correspondence. It was a response to Sister Mercy's carefully worded inquiry about suspicious land transfers and unexplained disappearances in the Perdition Crossing area. "They're sending an investigator," he said finally. "Marshal James Crawford. He'll arrive within the week." Sister Mercy watched Boone's face for any sign of recognition. "Do you know him?" "By reputation. Crawford's honest, competent, and absolutely incorruptible. He's also completely out of his depth when it comes to dealing with someone like Rex." Boone refolded the letter thoughtfully. "Rex has judges, politicians, and territorial officials in his pocket across 2 jurisdictions. Crawford's authority won't mean much if he doesn't have ironclad evidence of specific crimes. Then we need to make sure he has that evidence. Sister, if Crawford's coming, it changes everything. Rex will accelerate his timeline, maybe do something desperate to eliminate witnesses before the marshal arrives." Sister Mercy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "You mean he'll try to kill us?" "I mean he'll have to try. The question is whether we can stay ahead of him long enough to get the evidence Crawford needs." They spent the rest of the morning refining their strategy, but Sister Mercy found herself distracted by deeper concerns. The letter from her brother Thomas, which had arrived in the same delivery as Rex's summons, lay unopened on her small table. She recognized his careful handwriting, but something about the timing made her reluctant to read it. When Boone left to scout the approach routes to the Kensington ranch, Sister Mercy finally opened Thomas's letter. Her brother was a gentleman, a professor of literature at a college back east, and his correspondence usually brought news of family and mutual friends. This letter was different, Dearest Mercy, I hope this finds you well and safe in your new mission. I confess I've been worried since receiving your last letter, which spoke of difficulties you were facing but provided few details. I feel compelled to share something that came to my attention through my colleague, Professor Morrison, whose sister Mary lives or lived in your area. Mary Morrison has not responded to any letters for over 2 weeks, which is entirely unlike her. Professor Morrison has contacted the territorial authorities, but has received only vague assurances that she is well and has relocated for personal reasons. Mercy, I know you believe in the inherent goodness of people, but I fear you may have encountered a situation that requires more worldly wisdom than divine faith. If you are in any danger, please consider returning home immediately. There is no shame in recognizing when a mission cannot be completed safely. Your loving brother, Thomas. Sister Mercy set the letter down with shaking hands. Her brother's warning, combined with Rex's summons and the approaching marshal, made her feel like she was standing at the center of a web that was tightening around everyone she cared about. The afternoon brought Emma to the mission, arriving with the desperate urgency of a child who'd run all the way from town. The girl's usual bright demeanor was shadowed by fear and confusion. Sister Mercy, something bad is happening. What is it, child? My pa, he came home from talking to Rex Kensington, and he was different. Scared. He told Ma we can't afford to have me learning to read anymore, that it's putting ideas in my head that'll get our family in trouble. Sister Mercy knelt to Emma's eye level, seeing the tears the girl was trying so hard not to shed. What kind of trouble, Emma? Pa won't say exactly, but I heard him talking to Ma late last night. Rex told him that families who support the mission might find themselves having problems with their livestock, their crops, their water rights. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. Sister, are you really in some kind of business with Boone Calder? The question pierced Sister Mercy's heart. Here was a child asking for truth in a situation where truth had become a luxury she couldn't afford. Emma, sometimes adults have to make difficult choices to protect the people they care about. I can't explain everything right now, but I want you to know that whatever happens, I will always believe in your dream of becoming a teacher. But what if Rex shuts down the school? What if he makes everyone too scared to let their children learn? Sister Mercy thought of the letter hidden in her medical kit, of the dangerous game she and Boone were playing, of all the ways their plan could go wrong and leave this valley even more firmly under Rex Kensington's control. Emma, I need you to promise me something. No matter what you hear about me in the coming days, no matter what people say I've done or who they say I'm working with, I want you to remember that sometimes good people have to do things that look bad from the outside. Emma nodded solemnly, though Sister Mercy could see she didn't really understand. How could she? Sister Mercy wasn't entirely sure she understood it herself. That evening, as purple shadows gathered in the valley and stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sister Mercy prepared for what might be her last night of honest prayer. Tomorrow she would enter Rex Kensington's domain and begin the most dangerous performance of her life. She opened Boone's father's Bible, a worn leather volume he'd entrusted to her care, saying it had belonged to a man who'd believed in justice, even when justice seemed impossible. The pages fell open to Ecclesiastes. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. Sister Mercy closed the Bible and clutched her rosary beads, offering prayers for wisdom, for courage, and for forgiveness for what she was about to do. Tomorrow she would discover whether faith and deception could coexist in service of a greater good, or whether the corruption she was fighting had already begun to claim her soul. Outside her window, a single light flickered in the distant hills, Boone's signal that he was ready. Sister Mercy extinguished her own lamp and settled into restless sleep, knowing that when the sun rose, everything would change forever. The Kensington ranch house rose from the valley floor like a monument to ill-gotten prosperity. As Sister Mercy approached on foot through the gathering dusk, she counted at least 6 armed men positioned around the property's perimeter. Rex Kensington was taking no chances with this meeting. The main house was larger and more elaborate than anything else in the territory. 2 stories of imported timber and glass, with a wide veranda that commanded views of the entire valley. Lanterns glowed in most of the windows, and Sister Mercy could see the silhouettes of more armed men moving inside. Whatever Rex was planning, he wanted overwhelming force available, if negotiations went poorly. A man she recognized as Carson, Rex's Weasley lieutenant, met her at the front gate. "Evening, sister. Mr. Kensington is waiting for you in the main parlor. I'll need to check you for weapons first." Sister Mercy submitted to the search with outward calm, though her heart raced as Carson's hands moved efficiently over her habit. Hidden in the medical kit she carried was her coded journal, but Carson's search focused on weapons rather than papers. "She's clean, boss," Carson called toward the house. Rex Kensington emerged onto the veranda, dressed in fine clothes that emphasized his wealth and authority. His smile was warm enough to fool someone who hadn't seen him plan murders over a kitchen table. "Sister Mercy, welcome to my home. I appreciate you accepting my invitation on such short notice. Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Kensington." She followed him into a parlor that spoke of money and power, rich carpets, expensive furniture, and paintings that must have cost more than most people in Perdition Crossing made in a year. But Sister Mercy's attention was drawn immediately to the man sitting in a leather chair near the fireplace. Sheriff Wilkins rose as she entered, his badge catching the lamplight and his expression carefully neutral. "Evening, sister." Sister Mercy felt a chill of apprehension. She'd expected to meet with Rex alone, or perhaps with some of his hired guns present. The sheriff's presence suggested this meeting was more official and more dangerous than she'd anticipated. "Please, sit down," Rex said, gesturing to a chair positioned so that both he and Sheriff Wilkins could observe her easily. "Can I offer you something to drink? Coffee? Tea? Tea would be lovely, thank you." Rex poured from an elaborate service set, his movements casual and confident. "I hope you don't mind the sheriff joining us. What we're going to discuss has certain legal implications that require official oversight." Sister Mercy accepted the delicate china cup, noting that her hands remained steady despite her racing pulse. "I'm not sure what legal implications my mission work might have, Mr. Kensington." "Oh, I think you know exactly what I'm referring to, sister." Rex settled into his own chair, studying her with cold blue eyes. "The question is whether you're going to be sensible about the situation, or whether we'll need to pursue more formal channels." Sheriff Wilkins shifted uncomfortably, his nervous energy filling the elegant room like smoke. "Sister, I feel obligated to inform you that harboring fugitives is a territorial crime punishable by significant prison time." "I'm not harboring any fugitives, Sheriff." "No?" Rex's smile was sharp as a blade. "Then perhaps you can explain your recent association with Boone Calder, a man wanted for multiple murders across 3 territories. Sister Mercy forced herself to take a careful sip of tea, buying time to compose her response. The performance required her to seem naive but not stupid, caught off guard but not completely helpless. "Mr. Calder has been kind enough to offer protection when I found myself in difficult situations. I wasn't aware he was wanted for anything." Rex laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Sister, Black Boone Calder is one of the most notorious gunfighters in the territory. The reward on his head could fund your mission work for the next decade. Even if that's true, I hardly see how my accepting his help when threatened by unknown riders constitutes harboring a fugitive." "Unknown riders?" Rex leaned forward, his facade of politeness beginning to slip. "Sister, those were my men you encountered the other evening. They were investigating reports of suspicious activity around Mrs. Morrison's property." Sister Mercy felt the trap closing around her. "Mrs. Morrison's property, but I thought she'd moved to Denver to visit her sister." Sheriff Wilkins and Rex exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Sister Mercy realized with growing horror that they were no longer pretending to maintain the fiction of Mrs. Morrison's voluntary departure. Mrs. Morrison met with an unfortunate accident, Rex said finally. She fell down her cellar stairs and broke her neck. Very tragic. We found her body 3 days ago. The casual way he delivered this information she knew to be a lie, made Sister Mercy's blood run cold. Rex was telling her he'd murdered Mrs. Morrison, and that he was confident enough in his power to admit it openly. How terrible, she managed. I'll certainly include her in my prayers. I'm sure you will, but that's not why we're here, sister. Rex set down his teacup and leaned back in his chair. We're here because your association with Boone Calder has become problematic for everyone involved. Problematic how? Calder's a dangerous man with a violent past, but he's also demonstrated certain skills that could be valuable under the right circumstances. Rex paused, studying her reaction. I understand he's approached you about a business arrangement. Sister Mercy forced confusion onto her features. Business arrangement? Sheriff Wilkins leaned forward. Sister, we know Calder's been asking questions about the Cattleman's Bank in Silver Creek. We know you've been making inquiries about secure fund transfers and banking procedures. The pieces of their real plan began to fall into place, and Sister Mercy realized, with growing alarm, that Rex's trap was more sophisticated than she'd expected. He wasn't just planning to frame her for harboring fugitives, he was planning to frame both her and Boone for conspiring to rob the bank. Mr. Kensington, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, sister. Here's what's going to happen. Rex's voice grew cold and hard. Tomorrow morning, you and Boone Calder are going to attempt to rob the Cattleman's Bank. Sheriff Wilkins and a carefully selected posse will be waiting for you. There will be a gunfight, and unfortunately, both of you will be killed while resisting arrest. Sister Mercy felt the bottom drop out of her world. You're planning to murder us. I'm planning to solve several problems at once. Boone Calder dies, eliminating a potential threat to my operations. You die, removing an inconvenient witness to certain business arrangements. And the territorial authorities get a clear demonstration that Perdition Crossing is finally under proper law and order. Sister Mercy set down her teacup with carefully controlled movements, though her mind was racing. Everything she and Boone had planned was collapsing around them. Rex hadn't taken their bait, he'd used their own strategy against them. There's just one problem with your plan, Mr. Kensington, she said quietly. I'm not going to rob any bank. Rex's smile was genuinely amused. Oh, but you are, sister, because if you don't, several things will happen that you won't like at all. He gestured to Sheriff Wilkins, who produced a stack of official-looking documents from his jacket. First, the territorial authorities will receive evidence that your mission has been harboring known fugitives and facilitating criminal activities. Your church organization will lose its charter, and you'll face federal charges. Sister Mercy forced herself to examine the documents, though her hands wanted to tremble. The papers were expertly forged, showing records of financial transactions, correspondence with known criminals, and sworn statements from witnesses she'd never met. Second, Rex continued, the children you've been teaching will face certain consequences for their association with a criminal organization. Emma Patterson, for instance, might find herself placed in territorial custody while her parents face charges for allowing their child to be corrupted by seditious education. The threat to the children hit Sister Mercy like a physical blow. You would destroy innocent children's lives to maintain your hold on this valley. I would do whatever is necessary to protect my interests, just as you'll do whatever is necessary to protect theirs. Rex stood and moved to the window, gazing out at his domain. The choice is simple, sister. Participate in tomorrow's carefully orchestrated bank robbery and die quickly as a notorious criminal, or refuse and watch everyone you care about suffer while you spend the rest of your life in prison. Sheriff Wilkins spoke for the first time since delivering his initial threat. Sister, you need to understand that this is bigger than just you and Boone Calder. Rex has connections that reach all the way to the territorial capital. Fighting this won't accomplish anything except making more people suffer. Sister Mercy studied the sheriff's face, seeing something she hadn't expected: genuine regret. Sheriff Wilkins wasn't just corrupt, he was trapped, caught in Rex's web, just like everyone else in the valley. "Sheriff, how did you become involved in this?" Wilkins' face flushed with shame. "Rex owns the note on my house, my ranch, everything I've worked for my whole life. He bought the debt from the bank and made it clear that my cooperation was the price of keeping my family from losing everything." The admission hung in the air like a confession at a deathbed. Sister Mercy realized that Rex's power came not just from violence and corruption, but from systematically entrapping decent people in impossible situations. "How many others?" she asked quietly. "Most of the town council, 3 judges across 2 territories, the territorial tax assessor, and about half the ranch owners in the valley," Rex answered casually. "It's amazing how cooperative people become when you control their economic survival." Sister Mercy stood slowly, her legs unsteady but her resolve hardening. "And if I agree to your plan, if I participate in this charade and die as you've arranged, what guarantee do I have that you'll leave the children and their families alone?" "You have my word as a gentleman," Rex said with mock solemnity. "The word of a man who murders elderly widows and corrupts law enforcement officials." Rex's mask of civility finally slipped completely. "The word of a man who controls everything that matters in this territory, sister. You can accept that reality gracefully, or you can fight it and lose everything anyway." Sister Mercy moved toward the door, her medical kit clutched tightly in her hands. "I need time to consider your offer, of course. You have until dawn to make your decision. Calder's probably watching the house right now, so feel free to discuss the situation with him." Rex's smile returned, cold and confident. "Just remember that whatever you decide, the outcome has already been determined. The only variable is how much additional suffering you want to cause before accepting the inevitable." As Sister Mercy walked back toward town through the gathering darkness, her mind worked furiously to find some way out of the trap that had closed around them. Rex's plan was diabolically effective. Either she and Boone died as criminals in a staged bank robbery, or they refused, and Rex destroyed the lives of everyone they cared about while still achieving his ultimate goals. She was halfway back to town when a figure emerged from the shadows beside the road. Boone appeared as silently as always, his rifle ready and his eyes scanning the darkness for threats. "How did it go?" he asked quietly. Sister Mercy handed him the forged documents, watching his expression grow grimmer as he read by moonlight. "It's worse than we thought, Boone. Much worse. He's not just planning to kill us, he's planning to use our deaths to consolidate his control over the entire valley." Boone folded the papers carefully. "And he's got Sheriff Wilkins so thoroughly compromised that the law is actually helping him do it." "There's something else." Sister Mercy's voice was barely above a whisper. "Rex admitted to murdering Mrs. Morrison. Not in so many words, but clearly enough that I'm certain he's killed her, and probably others." Boone was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a cold fury that made Sister Mercy shiver. "Sister, there's something I haven't told you about my past with Rex Kensington." "What is it?" "The last job I took before retiring, the one that made me realize what I'd become. Rex Kensington was the man who hired me." Boone's hands clenched into fists. "The homesteader I killed, the man whose death haunts my dreams, he was trying to protect his land from Rex's expansion. Rex used me to commit murder, and I was too blinded by money to see it until it was too late." The revelation hit Sister Mercy like a thunderbolt. "The family you told me about were Rex's victims, just like Mrs. Morrison, just like everyone else who stood in his way. And I was his weapon." Boone's voice grew quiet, but the steel in it was unmistakable. "I've spent 5 years trying to atone for that sin, sister. Tomorrow, I'm going to finish what I should have done the day I learned the truth." Sister Mercy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Boone, what are you planning?" "I'm planning to give Rex exactly what he wants: a showdown with Black Boone Calder. But not the way he expects it." Boone turned toward her, and in the moonlight she could see the terrible resolve in his eyes. The question is whether you're willing to trust me one more time, even though everything we've planned has gone wrong. As they walked back toward town through the darkness, Sister Mercy clutched her rosary beads and prayed for wisdom. Tomorrow would bring violence and death, and she was no longer certain that justice and revenge could be distinguished from each other. But she was certain of one thing: Rex Kensington's reign of terror had to end, whatever the cost to her own soul. Dawn was still 3 hours away when Sister Mercy and Boone made their final preparations in the mission's main room. The building felt different now, not like a place of worship and healing, but like the last outpost before a battle that would determine the fate of everyone in Perdition Crossing. Boone had spread his weapons across the simple wooden table where Sister Mercy usually taught the children their letters. 2 Colt revolvers, carefully cleaned and loaded, a Winchester rifle with extra ammunition, several sticks of dynamite wrapped in oiled cloth, and most incongruously, his father's worn Bible, its leather cover soft with age and use. "I want you to understand something, sister," Boone said as he checked the action on one of the revolvers. "What we're about to do, it's not justice, it's not righteousness, it's just necessary." Sister Mercy watched his hands move with practiced efficiency, remembering that these same hands had gently bandaged her patients and helped repair the mission's damaged roof. "Then why does it feel like the right thing to do?" "Because sometimes the right thing and the necessary thing happen to be the same. Doesn't make it any less of a sin." Boone holstered the revolvers with movements so fluid they seemed unconscious. "I've made my peace with what I'm about to become again, sister, but I need to know you've made yours." Sister Mercy opened her medical kit and removed the coded journal where she'd recorded everything she'd observed about Rex's criminal organization. The pages represented weeks of careful documentation, but they also represented her willingness to become something she'd never imagined: a spy, a conspirator, a woman who used deception in service of a greater truth. "I became someone I didn't recognize the moment I agreed to this plan," she said quietly. "But I'd rather be a sinner fighting evil than a saint who enables it through inaction." Boone nodded, understanding passing between them without need for further words. He picked up his father's Bible and held it for a moment before placing it carefully in his saddlebag. "My father was a preacher. Did I ever tell you that? Spent his whole life believing that good would triumph over evil if righteous people just had enough faith." Boone's smile was sad and tired. "Took me 47 years to understand that sometimes righteous people have to pick up guns to make good triumph. What would your father say about what you're planning to do?" "He'd say I was damning my soul for the sake of temporal justice." Boone shouldered his rifle and moved toward the door. "He'd probably be right. But some things are worth damning your soul for, sister." They moved through the pre-dawn darkness toward the edge of town, where Boone's horse waited in the shelter of the old schoolhouse. The animal was a big bay gelding, calm and intelligent, trained for the kind of work that might require sudden movement and absolute reliability. As Boone checked his saddle and gear, Sister Mercy found herself studying the eastern horizon, where the first pale hints of dawn were beginning to show. In a few hours, Rex Kensington's carefully planned trap would spring. The question was whether they could turn that trap into something else entirely. "Boone, tell me the real plan. Not the version you gave Rex's men, but what you're actually going to do." Boone finished adjusting his stirrups and turned to face her. "I'm going to ride into Silver Creek exactly as Rex expects. I'm going to approach the bank exactly as he's planned. And then, instead of trying to rob it, I'm going to do something he won't expect. Which is, I'm going to walk into that bank and surrender myself to Marshal Crawford." Sister Mercy stared at him in shock. "Marshal Crawford? But he's not supposed to arrive for another 2 days." "He arrived yesterday evening, sister. I've been watching his movements since he rode into Silver Creek." Boone's smile was grim but determined. "Rex doesn't know Crawford's already here, which means Rex's entire plan is based on false information." The implications began to sink in. If Crawford's already in Silver Creek, Then Rex's corrupt sheriff and his carefully selected posse are going to find themselves facing a federal marshal who can't be bought, can't be intimidated, and who's been specifically sent to investigate the very crimes Rex has been committing. Sister Mercy felt hope flicker in her chest for the first time since leaving the Kensington ranch. But what about the evidence? Crawford can arrest Rex, but without proof of his crimes. That's where your part of the plan comes in. Boone pulled a folded paper from his shirt pocket. While I'm creating a very public distraction in Silver Creek, you're going to break into Rex's ranch house and steal the contents of his safe. Sister Mercy took the paper with trembling hands. It was a detailed floor plan of the Kensington house, showing not just the location of Rex's office and the safe, but also guard positions, escape routes, and timing windows. Boone, I'm not a thief. I don't know the first thing about breaking into safes, or you don't have to break into it, sister. You just have to be there when someone else opens it for you. I don't understand. Boone mounted his horse and leaned down to speak quietly. Martha Kensington has been planning to leave her brother-in-law for months. She knows about the safe, she knows the combination, and she's been waiting for the right opportunity to gather evidence that will put Rex away forever. Sister Mercy felt the world shift around her. Martha's been working against Rex? Martha's husband, Rex's brother, died under mysterious circumstances 2 years ago. She suspected Rex was involved, but she needed proof. When you arrived in Perdition Crossing and started asking the right questions, Martha saw an opportunity to finally get justice for her husband's murder. The complexity of the situation was staggering. How long have you known about Martha's involvement? Since the day you arrived. Martha approached me that first week, wanting to know if you could be trusted. We've been coordinating our efforts ever since. Boone gathered his reins, preparing to ride. The plan was always to use Rex's arrogance against him. Sister, we just had to wait for him to make the kind of mistake that would give us the opening we needed. Sister Mercy thought back over the past weeks, remembering Martha's careful questions, her warnings about Rex, her obvious concern for the mission's safety. She's been protecting me this entire time. She's been protecting all of us. But today, the protection ends and the reckoning begins. As Boone prepared to ride toward Silver Creek and his confrontation with destiny, Sister Mercy felt the weight of everything that depended on the next few hours. Emma and the other children, sleeping peacefully in their beds, unaware that their futures hung in the balance. The townspeople who'd placed their trust in her mission work. Martha Kensington, who'd spent 2 years planning her revenge against the man who'd murdered her husband. Boone, she called softly as he turned his horse toward the road. What if something goes wrong? What if Rex's plan succeeds despite everything we've done? Boone looked back at her, and in the growing light she could see both resolution and peace in his weathered features. Then at least we'll have tried, sister. Sometimes that's all righteous people can do, try their best and trust that God will make sense of the chaos afterward. He spurred his horse into a canter and disappeared into the morning mist, leaving Sister Mercy alone with her doubts, her fears, and her determination to see justice done. She watched until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely, then turned toward the Kensington ranch and whatever destiny awaited her there. The sun was rising now, painting the eastern sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded her of both hope and blood. Sister Mercy clutched her rosary beads one final time, offering a prayer for courage, for wisdom, and for the strength to do what was necessary, regardless of the cost to her own soul. Then she began walking toward the most dangerous morning of her life, carrying nothing but her medical kit, her faith, and the terrible knowledge that sometimes redemption required a willingness to embrace damnation. The Kensington ranch was eerily quiet as Sister Mercy approached through the morning mist. Most of Rex's men had ridden out before dawn, heading to Silver Creek to participate in the carefully orchestrated trap that would end with Boone Calder's death. Only 2 guards remained visible, one lounging on the front porch, another patrolling the perimeter with the casual confidence of someone who believed all threats had been neutralized. Sister Mercy circled wide to approach from the north, using the creek bed and scattered cottonwoods for cover, as Boone had instructed. Her heart hammered against her ribs with each step, but her hands remained steady. Whatever she had become in the past week, spy, conspirator, willing participant in deception, she was committed to seeing it through. Martha Kensington was waiting exactly where Boone had said she would be, hidden in the root cellar behind the main house. The saloon owner's usually confident demeanor was strained with tension, but her eyes burned with the same determination that had carried Sister Mercy through the darkest moments of her wartime nursing service. "Sister," Martha whispered as they embraced briefly, "thank God you made it. Rex left an hour ago with most of his men. He's convinced everything will go exactly as he planned. How much time do we have?" "Maybe 30 minutes before the remaining guards start wondering why I'm not in the main house. Less if something goes wrong in Silver Creek and Rex comes racing back." Martha pulled a small leather satchel from beneath her shawl. "I've got the tools we need to open the safe, but getting to Rex's office means going through the main house." Sister Mercy studied the imposing structure above them. "What about the guards?" "Carson's on the front porch, and he's been drinking since Rex left. Jake's patrolling, but he follows a predictable pattern: 20 minutes checking the eastern approach, 10 minutes checking the western approach, then a 15-minute break in the bunkhouse. That's not much of a window." Martha's smile was sharp as a blade. "It's enough if we move fast and don't hesitate." She checked the contents of her satchel one final time. "Sister, I need you to understand something before we do this. The evidence in that safe, it's not just about land theft and corruption. It's about murder, multiple murders, including my husband's." Sister Mercy saw the pain beneath Martha's anger and felt a familiar stab of recognition. "How did you know?" "Thomas was investigating irregularities in territorial land grants. He'd found patterns that suggested systematic fraud, and he was preparing to contact federal authorities." Martha's voice grew quiet. "The night before he was supposed to meet with a territorial judge, he died in his sleep. Heart failure," the doctor said. "Very sudden, very convenient. You think Rex poisoned him?" "I know Rex poisoned him. Thomas was healthy as a horse, and the only person who had access to his food and drink that evening was Rex himself. They'd had dinner together to discuss family business." Martha's hands clenched into fists. "I've been planning this for 2 years, sister. Waiting for the right moment, the right allies, the right opportunity to prove what he did." They moved carefully up the slope toward the house, timing their approach to coincide with Jake's patrol schedule. Sister Mercy found herself thinking of Emma and the other children, probably just waking up and preparing for another day of school. If this plan failed, Rex would make sure those children never had the chance to learn, to grow, to become something better than their circumstances. The back door of the main house was unlocked, Martha's doing, from her earlier reconnaissance. They slipped inside, moving through a kitchen that smelled of coffee and bacon, past a dining room furnished with the kind of luxury that could only be purchased with blood money. Rex's office was on the second floor, a spacious room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a massive desk made from imported mahogany. Behind the desk hung a painting of Rex's father, the previous generation's patriarch, who'd built the ranch through hard work and honest dealing, unaware that his son would transform it into the headquarters of a criminal empire. Martha moved to the painting with practiced efficiency, swinging it aside to reveal the safe beneath. "Thomas taught me about safes during his investigation work. This one's a Mosler difficult to crack unless you know the combination. Which you do." "Which I do. Rex is arrogant enough to use the date of his father's death as the combination. He sees himself as carrying on the family legacy, when what he's actually doing is destroying everything his father built." The safe opened with a soft click, revealing stacks of documents, several bags of gold coins, and what appeared to be a collection of personal items taken from victims. Martha began pulling out papers with methodical efficiency, her face growing grimmer with each revelation. "Sister, This is worse than I imagined. Rex has been systematically murdering anyone who threatened his operations for over 5 years. Martha handed her a leather-bound ledger. Look at this: names, dates, methods of elimination. Mrs. Morrison, my husband, at least a dozen others. Sister Mercy scanned the ledger with growing horror. Rex had documented his crimes with the pride of a businessman recording profitable transactions. Each entry included the victim's name, the perceived threat they represented, and the method used to eliminate them. Poison, staged accidents, outright murder. Rex had employed them all with casual efficiency. My God, she whispered, he's been planning this for years. Since his father died and left him the ranch, Rex saw an opportunity to expand beyond legitimate cattle ranching into something much more profitable. Martha continued pulling documents from the safe. Forged deeds, bribery records, correspondence with corrupt officials, it's all here, sister. Everything Marshal Crawford needs to put Rex away forever. The sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway froze them both. Martha's eyes went wide with alarm as she recognized the distinctive heavy tread of Carson, the guard who was supposed to be on the front porch. Quick, Martha whispered, stuffing the remaining documents into her satchel. The back stairs. They moved as quietly as possible toward the rear of the house, but Carson's voice carried clearly from the main stairway. Martha, that you up there? Rex wants to see you in his office when he gets back. Sister Mercy felt her heart stop. If Carson discovered them in Rex's office with the safe open and documents missing, their entire plan would collapse. Worse, Rex would have the excuse he needed to eliminate both of them as thieves and traitors. Martha made a quick decision, stepping into the hallway and calling down to Carson with forced casualness. Just looking for some papers Rex asked me to find. Give me a few minutes. Rex didn't say nothing about papers to me. Rex doesn't tell you everything, Carson. Just give me a few minutes to finish up here. The sound of Carson's footsteps grew closer, and Sister Mercy realized they were trapped. The back stairs were too far away, and Carson was already climbing toward the second floor. In moments, he would reach Rex's office and discover the evidence of their crime. Then, from outside the house, came a sound that changed everything, the rapid peal of the church bell in Perdition Crossing, ringing out across the valley in a pattern Sister Mercy recognized. 3 short rings, 3 long, 3 short again. The distress signal she'd arranged with Emma in case of emergency. Something had gone terribly wrong in Silver Creek. Carson paused on the stairs, confused by the unexpected signal. What the hell is that bell ringing for? Martha seized the moment of distraction, calling down with genuine concern in her voice. That's the emergency signal, Carson. Something's wrong in town. The distant sound of rapid gunfire echoed across the valley, confirming Martha's words. Whatever was happening in Silver Creek, it was violent and chaotic, exactly the kind of situation that would draw every available man away from the ranch. Carson's footsteps reversed direction as he headed back toward the front door. I better check on that. You finish up here and get downstairs. As soon as Carson's footsteps faded, Martha and Sister Mercy raced down the back stairs and out of the house, carrying their stolen evidence toward whatever destiny awaited them in Perdition Crossing. Behind them, the church bell continued its frantic warning, calling the faithful to stand against the darkness that had ruled their valley for too long. The scene in Perdition Crossing was unlike anything Sister Mercy had ever witnessed, even during the chaos of wartime field hospitals. The main street had become a battleground, with townspeople armed with hunting rifles, shotguns, and farm tools, facing off against the remaining members of Rex's gang who'd returned from Silver Creek in desperate flight. At the center of it all stood Marshal James Crawford, a tall, weathered man whose federal badge caught the morning sunlight as he directed the defense of the town. Beside him, impossibly, stood Boone Calder alive, unharmed, and apparently very much in alliance with the territorial law enforcement he'd spent 20 years evading. Sister Mercy! Emma's voice cut through the chaos as the girl ran toward them from behind the general store. Thank God you're safe. Mr. Boone came back and told us everything about Rex's plan, about the fake bank robbery, about how Sheriff Wilkins was helping them. Sister Mercy knelt to embrace the child, her mind struggling to process the rapidly changing situation. Emma, what happened? Where's Sheriff Wilkins? Marshal Crawford arrested him, and when Rex's men came, riding back from Silver Creek, the marshal called on everyone to help defend the town. Even my pa picked up his old army rifle. Martha clutched the satchel containing Rex's incriminating documents as she surveyed the battle. Where's Rex? Coming up Main Street with his silver spurs flashing in the sun. Boone's voice carried across the street as he approached them, his rifle smoking from recent use. He's got maybe 6 men left, and they're desperate enough to try anything. Marshal Crawford joined them, his authoritative presence bringing a sense of order to the chaos. Mrs. Kensington, Sister Mercy Boone tells me, you've obtained evidence that will put Rex Kensington away for life. Martha handed him the satchel without hesitation. Everything you need, Marshal. Murder, fraud, bribery, land theft. It's all documented in Rex's own handwriting. Crawford opened the satchel and scanned the contents quickly, his experienced eyes recognizing the significance of what he was seeing. This is more than enough to hang him 3 times over. The question is whether we can take him alive to stand trial. The sound of approaching hoofbeats announced Rex's arrival, and Sister Mercy felt her blood run cold as she saw the expression on his face. Gone was the polished facade of respectability, replaced by the naked fury of a man who'd lost everything and was determined to take as many people with him as possible. Rex Kensington rode into town like an avenging angel of death, his remaining men spread out behind him in a formation designed for maximum destruction. His silver spurs, the symbol of his arrogance and presumed invincibility, caught the light as he reined in his horse at the center of Main Street. "Boone Calder!" Rex's voice carried clearly across the battlefield. "You should have stayed dead, you son of a bitch." Boone stepped into the street, his rifle held ready but not yet aimed. "Rex, it's over. Marshal Crawford has all the evidence he needs. Surrender now and you might live to see trial." Rex's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Evidence? You think evidence matters when I've got judges bought and paid for across 3 territories? You think one federal marshal can undo 5 years of careful planning? I think one federal marshal with ironclad evidence can do whatever justice requires," Crawford called out, moving to stand beside Boone. "Rex Kensington, you're under arrest for murder, fraud, and conspiracy against the territorial government." "Like hell I am." Rex drew his gun with practiced speed, but his shot went wide as his horse shied at the sudden movement. The battle that followed was brief but vicious. Rex's men, already demoralized by their failure in Silver Creek, found themselves facing not just Boone Calder and Marshal Crawford, but an entire town that had finally found the courage to fight back against tyranny. Sister Mercy pressed Emma behind the cover of the general store's porch as bullets flew across Main Street. She watched in amazement as neighbors who'd spent years living in fear suddenly stood together against their oppressors. Mr. Patterson, Emma's father, worked his old army rifle with deadly precision. Martha Kensington had somehow acquired a shotgun and was using it with grim efficiency against men who'd terrorized her for years. But it was Boone who ended it. As Rex's remaining men fell or fled, the final confrontation came down to the 2 men whose conflict had shaped the destiny of Perdition Crossing. Rex, his silver spurs now tarnished with blood and dirt, faced off against Boone Calder in the middle of Main Street. "This is how it should have ended 5 years ago," Rex snarled, his gun trained on Boone's chest. "When I hired you to kill that homesteader family, I should have put a bullet in your back afterward." "Maybe you should have," Boone replied quietly. "But you didn't, and now you're going to pay for every murder, every theft, every life you've destroyed in the name of profit." Rex's finger tightened on the trigger, but his shot went high as Emma suddenly broke from Sister Mercy's protective embrace and ran into the street. "Mr. Boone, look out!" The child's warning came just as Rex fired, and Boone's return shot was swift and final. Rex Kensington fell backward from his horse, his silver spurs catching the sunlight one last time before he hit the dusty ground and moved no more. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the settling of dust and the quiet sobbing of people who'd lived in fear for too long and suddenly found themselves free. Marshal Crawford holstered his weapon and walked over to check Rex's body, his movements careful and professional. "It's over," he announced to the assembled townspeople. "Rex Kensington is dead, and his organization is finished." Sister Mercy emerged from cover, still holding Emma's hand, and surveyed the aftermath of the battle that had liberated Perdition Crossing. Bodies littered Main Street, but they were the bodies of oppressors rather than innocents. The town had paid a price for its freedom, but it was a price willingly paid by people who'd chosen courage over submission. Boone Calder stood in the center of it all, his rifle finally lowered, his face bearing an expression of profound exhaustion mixed with something that might have been peace. After 20 years of running from his past, he'd finally found a fight worth winning and a cause worth risking everything for. The church bell, which had rung the alarm that brought the town together, now tolled once in acknowledgement of the dead, a sound of mourning that was also a song of liberation for the living. 3 months later, Sister Mercy stood before the newly erected sign that read Perdition Crossing Community Church and reflected on how much had changed since that bloody morning when Rex Kensington's reign of terror had finally ended. The town had a new name now voted on democratically by residents who no longer feared retribution for their choices. Perdition Crossing was becoming simply Crossing, a place where paths converged rather than where souls were lost. The mission had grown beyond anything she'd originally envisioned. The old building still served as both clinic and schoolhouse, but plans were underway for a proper church and a separate school building. Emma Patterson had thrown herself into her studies with renewed dedication, already reading at a level that would have been remarkable for children twice her age in more established communities. "Sister Mercy?" Emma appeared at her elbow, as she often did these days, carrying a stack of books that Martha had ordered from back east. "Mr. Jameson says the new medical supplies arrived on today's stage, and there's a letter for you." Sister Mercy accepted the envelope with curiosity, noting the official seal of the territorial government. Inside, she found a formal commendation for her role in exposing the corruption that had plagued the region, along with a substantial grant to expand her mission work. More importantly, there was a personal note from Marshal Crawford. "Sister Mercy, the trials of Rex Kensington's surviving associates concluded last week with convictions on all counts. The evidence you and Mrs. Kensington obtained proved decisive in securing justice for the families of his victims. The territorial governor has asked me to convey his personal gratitude for your courage in the face of extraordinary danger. I thought you should know that Boone Calder's federal charges have been formally dismissed in recognition of his cooperation with our investigation. He is a free man, with no outstanding warrants in any territory. I hope this news brings you satisfaction, as I know you played a crucial role in his redemption. Your servant in justice, Marshal James Crawford." 3 months later, Sister Mercy stood before the newly erected sign that read Perdition Crossing Community Church and reflected on how much had changed since that bloody morning when Rex Kensington's reign of terror had finally ended. The town had a new name now, voted on democratically by residents who no longer feared retribution for their choices. Perdition Crossing was becoming simply Crossing, a place where paths converged rather than where souls were lost. The mission had grown beyond anything she'd originally envisioned. The old building still served as both clinic and schoolhouse, but plans were underway for a proper church and a separate school building. Emma Patterson had thrown herself into her studies with renewed dedication, already reading at a level that would have been remarkable for children twice her age in more established communities. "Sister Mercy," Emma appeared at her elbow, as she often did these days, carrying a stack of books that Martha had ordered from back east. "Mr. Jameson says the new medical supplies arrived on today's stage, and there's a letter for you." Sister Mercy accepted the envelope with curiosity, noting the official seal of the territorial government. Inside, she found a formal commendation for her role in exposing the corruption that had plagued the region, along with a substantial grant to expand her mission work. More importantly, there was a personal note from Marshal Crawford. "Sister Mercy, the trials of Rex Kensington's surviving associates concluded last week with convictions on all counts. The evidence you and Mrs. Kensington obtained proved decisive in securing justice for the families of his victims. The territorial governor has asked me to convey his personal gratitude for your courage in the face of extraordinary danger. I thought you should know that Boone Calder's federal charges have been formally dismissed in recognition of his cooperation with our investigation. He is a free man, with no outstanding warrants in any territory. I hope this news brings you satisfaction, as I know you played a crucial role in his redemption. Your servant in justice, Marshal James Crawford." Sister Mercy folded the letter carefully, feeling a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. Boone had found his redemption after all, not through isolation and self-imposed exile, but through choosing to stand for something greater than himself when it mattered most. "Good news?" Emma asked, her bright eyes studying Sister Mercy's expression with the perceptiveness that would serve her well as the teacher she dreamed of becoming. "Very good news, child. Justice sometimes moves slowly, but it does move." They walked together toward the mission, where the afternoon's lessons waited. As they approached, Sister Mercy noticed a familiar figure sitting on the front porch, Boone Calder. No longer the hermit of the hills, but not quite the settled townsman either. He'd taken to visiting regularly, helping with repairs and construction projects, teaching the older boys practical skills, and gradually finding his place in a community that had learned to value redemption over reputation. "Afternoon, sister." "Emma." Boone rose as they approached, his movements still bearing that unconscious grace of a man comfortable with danger, but his eyes holding a peace that hadn't been there months before. "I've got that lumber you ordered for the new schoolroom. Tommy Patterson and some of the other boys are helping me unload it." "Thank you, Boone. That's very kind." Sister Mercy noticed how naturally he included the children in his work, how patient he was with their questions and eagerness to help. "Emma, why don't you go check on the medical supplies Mr. Jameson mentioned?" As the girl ran off, Sister Mercy and Boone stood together in comfortable silence, watching the ordinary miracle of a town going about its daily business without fear. Martha Kensington emerged from the general store, her face bearing the contentment of a woman who'd finally seen justice done for her murdered husband. Sheriff Roberts, the honest lawman who'd replaced the corrupt Wilkins, tipped his hat to them as he made his rounds. Children played in the street without the nervous glances over their shoulders that had once been second nature. "I got Marshal Crawford's letter," Boone said quietly. "Charges dismissed, record cleared. After 20 years of running, I'm finally free to stop." "And will you? Stop, I mean?" Boone was quiet for a long moment, his gaze taking in the bustling community around them. "I've been thinking about that, sister. About what a man does with his life when he's finally free to choose his own path." "And what have you decided?" "I've decided that freedom isn't just about being able to go wherever you want. Sometimes it's about finding a place worth staying for." Boone turned to look at her directly. "This town, these people, they've given me something I never thought I'd have again, a chance to build instead of destroy, to protect instead of threaten." Sister Mercy felt her heart swell with gratitude for the mysterious ways that Providence worked in the world. "So, you'll stay?" "If the town will have me, if you think there's room here for a reformed gunfighter who's learned the value of building schools instead of earning bounties." Boone Calder, "This community has room for anyone willing to work for the common good. Your past doesn't define your future unless you let it. Emma reappeared with Tommy Patterson and two other boys in tow, all of them eager to help with the construction project. Sister Mercy watched Boone naturally take charge of the group, explaining the importance of measuring twice and cutting once, teaching them to respect both tools and materials. "Mr. Boone," Tommy asked as they carried lumber toward the construction site, "is it true you used to be the fastest gun in the territory?" Boone paused in his work, considering his answer carefully. "I was fast enough to stay alive for 20 years, Tommy. But I learned that being fast with a gun isn't nearly as important as being slow to use it. What's more important than being fast? Being wise, being kind, being someone that children can look up to and learn from." Boone resumed his work, his voice carrying clearly to where Sister Mercy stood, listening. "Being the kind of man who builds things that last longer than his own lifetime." As the afternoon wore on, Sister Mercy found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. She'd come to Perdition Crossing to serve God through service to others, but she'd learned that sometimes service required more courage than she'd imagined. Sometimes it required becoming someone she'd never thought she could be: a spy, a conspirator, a woman willing to use deception in service of truth. Her rosary beads, worn smooth by months of prayer and worry, caught the afternoon light as she prepared for evening prayers. Each bead represented not just a prayer offered, but a choice made, a stand taken, a moment when faith had required action rather than contemplation. The church bell, the same bell that had once called the town to arms against tyranny, now rang its evening call to worship. But the sound was different now, carrying hope instead of warning, peace instead of alarm. Sister Mercy listened to its familiar tone and smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to serve, to teach, to heal. As the sun set over the valley that was no longer ruled by fear, Sister Mercy offered a prayer of gratitude for the mysterious ways that Providence worked in the world. Sometimes redemption came through isolation and contemplation. Sometimes it came through standing in the street with a gun in your hand, facing down the forces of corruption and choosing justice over safety. And sometimes, Sister Mercy reflected as she watched Boone teach the children and saw Emma bent over her books with determined concentration, redemption came through the simple act of building something better than what came before. In the end, perhaps that was the most profound miracle of all, the transformation of a place called Perdition into a community called Crossing, where paths converged and souls found their way home. The new church sign swayed gently in the evening breeze, its fresh paint gleaming with promise. Tomorrow there would be lessons to teach, patience to tend, and a community to nurture. But tonight there was peace in the valley, and that was miracle enough for anyone willing to see it.